Welcome to AP World History Modern Topic 6.5 Economic Imperialism. The essential question from our text: what economic factors contributed to the imperialism in the global economy between 1750 and 1900? The big picture for Topic 6.5. For centuries, India was the world's leading supplier of finished cotton textiles. By the late 18th century, the Industrial Revolution and a new source of cotton from America had allowed Britain to flood the market with inexpensive textiles, pushing independent Indian textile artisans out of business. By the late 19th century, India was producing only raw cotton for Britain, not cotton textiles. After Britain's textile factories processed India's cotton, the colonial government sold some of its factory-made or, quote, finished textiles back to the Indian subcontinent at inflated prices. Another critical raw material for Britain was the drug opium. This is where you get cocaine, heroin. The poppies from which it is obtained grew easily in South Asia's fertile lands. Selling it to the Chinese became very profitable for Britain. The Opium War with Great Britain cost China losing much trading independence. Topic number 1, the rise of economic imperialism. What's the big idea here? The agricultural influence and power of raw materials shifted away from Asia and Latin America to industrialized states such as Great Britain, the U.S., France, Japan, and Germany between the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Topic number 1, the rise of economic imperialism. I got 2 takeaways for you. Number 1, economic imperialism is a situation in which foreign business interests have great economic power or influence developed as businesses took advantage of natural resources beyond their borders. What the heck does that even mean? You're kind of running the country without running it. You don't run it politically, you run it economically. So the people there are still quote unquote in charge. They have their own government in place. But money talks. You're really running the show. Number 2, the 3 main resources exploited by economic imperialism were A, people, B, raw materials, and C, refined materials. Topic number 2, economic imperialism in Asia. What's the big idea here? England's defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 created an opening for the British and Dutch to take over the spice trade in Asia from the Spanish and Portuguese, who formerly had a monopoly on it. Okay, topic number 2, I got 11 takeaways for you. The English East India Company formed in 1600 to engage in the lucrative spice trade. However, cotton and silk textiles would replace spices as the East India Company's major import. Number 2, the Dutch East India Company had a monopoly on trade with the Dutch East Indies in present-day Indonesia. 3, in 1830, the Dutch government introduced the culture system, which forced farmers to choose between growing cash crops for export or performing convict labor, compulsory unpaid work. We talked about that in previous topics. Number 4, under this system, villagers either had to set aside 1/5 of their rice fields for such export crops as sugar, coffee, or indigo, or they had to work in a government field for 66 days if they had no land. Number 5, Chinese goods such as porcelain, silk, and tea were in great demand in Great Britain. However, the Chinese were not interested in British goods, and in this trade imbalance, British silver reserves became low. The East India Company began forcing farmers in India to grow opium. Number 8, the company then sold it for silver in China. Number 9, millions of Chinese became addicted to this drug. 10, the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, ended in Chinese defeat and established to the world that industrialized nations can control non-industrialized nations. That's a big, big theme right there. Number 11, be sure to understand that this is economic control, not political. You're not putting your own guy in power. On the surface, it looks like not always indigenous, but the native people of that country, like they're running their show politically. But again, money talks. Okay, topic number 3, economic imperialism in Africa. What's the big idea? Before colonization, most farming in Africa was to raise food crops. After colonization, land that had been devoted to growing food was converted to cash crop production to provide raw materials for European industries and goods for European markets. In exchange, the Africans received cotton textiles, canned food, and alcoholic beverages. This unequal trade structure made the colonies economically independent on the imperial power. I got 9 takeaways for you. Number 1, reliance on a single cash crop, one grown to be sold in a country or region, left many Africans vulnerable during periods of drought, economic decline, or falling world prices. Number 2, food production declined as farmers chose to plant cash crops such as cotton, which would increase the value of their land. Number 3, food shortages, even famines could arise because the most arable land was devoted to growing crops for export. Number 4, the Gold Coast became the largest cocoa producer in the world. Number 5, slavery was outlawed in British colonies in 1833, but it persisted elsewhere in Africa. Number 6, the French army often paid its African soldiers in slaves, and French colonial administrators relied on slaves for many of their staff. Slavery was not abolished by law throughout Africa until the first quarter of the 20th century. That's crazy. 8, slave labor was used to produce many of the cash crops, especially oil palms, coffee, and cocoa. Number 9, as usual, not everyone fit into one category. For example, Quaker-owned Cadbury stopped buying slave-grown cocoa from Portuguese African colonies in 1908 after the slave trade was exposed. So we've been slamming all these companies, right? You know, generalizations and stereotypes are for lazy thinkers, so we don't want to fall into that trap. Just like when someone says all the founding fathers were slave owners, not true. John Adams didn't own slaves, and he didn't own slaves for moral reasons, right? Not all the companies that we're talking about here, agreed with treating people so horribly. So there are some moral bright spots here. We got to be careful we don't generalize. Okay, topic number 3, imperialism in Latin America. What's the big idea here? In the second half of the 19th century, Latin America was subjected to imperialist aggression from both Europe and the U.S. The new imperialism was concerned with the world capitalist economy as the industrialized nations of Europe and the United States sought raw materials, low-wage labor, and new markets for their goods. The emerging middle classes of Latin America were hungry for the latest European news and fashions. I got 10 takeaways for you. Number 1, the U.S. was not yet as established a world power as Britain and France. Number 2, in 1823, the Monroe Doctrine, the U.S. policy of opposing European colonialism in the Americas, told the world that Latin America was in the U.S. sphere of influence. So you're not going to exploit these people. We are. Okay, number 3, in the late 19th century, Britain had invested more in Argentina than in its own colony of India. 4, Spain colonized the region of present-day Chile between 1540 and 1818. 5, Brazil once had a booming rubber industry. However, it declined after people began growing rubber in Malaysia at a lower cost. 6, foreign investors often used their governments to act as strong men, quote, it's from the text, to help them achieve the ends they wanted. Number 7, the United Fruit Company was an American corporation that traded in tropical fruit, primarily bananas, grown on Latin American plantations and sold in the U.S. and Europe. The United Fruit Company allied itself with large landowners to pressure governments to maintain conditions that would be favorable for the U.S. company. In short, the writer O. Henry coined the term banana republics to describe small Central American countries under the economic power of foreign-based corporations. You got corporations controlling countries, not another government, a corporation. The banana republics were politically unstable states with an economy dependent upon the exportation of a limited resource product such as bananas or minerals. Those are your 10 takeaways. I got subtopic A, economic imperialism in Hawaii. Big idea. The power of investments to transform and dominate small or weak states could also be seen in the Pacific Islands. A group of American businesses and sugar planters in Hawaii went so far as to overthrow the constitutional monarchy in 1893, hoping that the islands would be annexed by the U.S. In 1898, Hawaii became a territory of the U.S. and an official state in 1959. These are businessmen, right? You're seeing this island, these people, a culture as a business opportunity. You're absorbed into this corporation by being absorbed into the United States. And this is not ancient history. My wife and I had a beautiful honeymoon in Hawaii in August of 2002. And I had some friends in Hawaii that were giving us the inside tour. We're having a great old time. But man, at some red lights, guess what I saw? I saw the Hawaiian Islands on the back of pickup trucks. And then one word, stolen. And then we did what people told us not to do. We went on the side of the island where it's mostly natives. And they said, don't go over there. It could get rough. Well, it ended up being the best part of our trip. The people were so nice. They gave us a history of the island, their people, the culture. They're still upset. As we record this lesson, it's 2020. They're still upset about this. And they still feel their culture and their identity was ripped away from them. So very interesting perspective. Okay, I want to go back. And I asked you during the Ayn Rand Che Guevara lecture to please remember Atlas Shrugged. Remember the John Lee Anderson biography. I showed you the books. I talked about them a little bit. Final thoughts on topic 6.5. The Industrial Revolution developed a demand for raw materials and the technological ability through steamships, railroads, and military weapons to control their territories. These set the stage for economic imperialism. So something I want to ask you on these final thoughts. When I say take over a country, what do you think of? Most students will think like, a military takeover. There's tanks, there's planes, there's ships, there's soldiers, there's shooting, right? This is different. This is an economic takeover, okay? Most countries, this time we're talking about, they still rule themselves from a political standpoint. So make sure you understand that. And this can be gold for you in a DBQ if you get a DBQ on any of these topics. However, these countries were controlled from an economic standpoint for larger industrialized nations. The United Fruit Company was once so powerful that the U.S. government destroyed democracy in a country for the United Fruit Company. The heck am I talking about? Right? I'm talking about Guatemala, and I'm talking about 1931. I'm talking about how the United Fruit Company had a monopoly on the country's coffee and banana trade. It owned Guatemala's docks, railroads, communications. Jorge Ubico, hope I'm pronouncing that right, he exempted the United Fruit Company from taxes. He was Guatemala's president. He gave them 200,000 hectares of land. And guess what he let them do? If they had workers that didn't want to work, workers that tried to form some type of union, or workers that just demanded better working conditions, the Guatemalan president, because he was a puppet of the United Fruit Company, a corporation in the U.S., he gave them the authority to execute bothersome workers. So next time you complain about your boss, imagine you do something wrong at work, we're just going to take you outside and put 2 bullets in your head. Okay, he was ousted in the October Revolution in 1944. and he had a democratically elected president. He built hospitals, schools, health, and I began cracking down on labor practices of these big companies. The CIA orchestrated a coup in 1954. They ousted this reformed Guatemalan government of Jacob Arbenz Guzman. The coup installed a right-wing regime and decades of bloody repression. This is specifically what Che Guevara, a very young Che Guevara, he's going to be in Guatemala. Okay, so I'm connecting our textbook to the Ayn Rand Che Guevara lecture. He's going to see what the United Fruit Company and their influence, how they're really running the show in Guatemala. And he's going to blame the United Fruit Company for the poverty, the horrible working conditions, the exploitation, and in some cases, the execution of innocent workers. And by blaming the United Fruit Company, he's blaming the United States because they're an American company, and he's blaming capitalism because this is capitalism, right? This is the capitalist machine. And yeah, he's going to get some far left ideologies going, but this is why. And please, as you'll find out once we cover the Soviet Union, I'm not promoting communism, man. Communism does not work. That's not my opinion. It's a historically defensible claim. If you don't believe me, I don't know, read The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn. But we're going to get into more on how communism does not work as we get in the 20th century. But I just want you to think, right? I'm not telling you to run out and get a Che Guevara shirt. Most people who wear Che Guevara shirts don't even know anything about them. But I'm just trying to make a point, is this is how people are starting to hate capitalism when they see stuff like this. Okay? And, you know, and I want to quote Ayn Rand here, just so you don't, you know, I don't want you running out and buying a hammer and sickle flag for your bedroom here. The communist chief's purpose is to destroy every form of independence. Independent work, independent action, independent property, independent thought, an independent mind or an independent man, conformity, a likeness, servility, submission, and obedience are necessary to establish a communist slave state. That's Ayn Rand. So this is why I told you to keep that lecture in mind as we go through these things. Here's my question. The John Lee Anderson biography on Che Guevara and Atlas Shrugged, and Fountainhead for that matter, by Ayn Rand, are some of my favorite books. And I get a lot of blowback from other people about this. A lot of people can't believe I like Che Guevara's biography by John Lee Anderson. And some people are enraged if I talk about Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged. These are two very hot button topics, two people that get a rise out of others one way or another. But what I'm trying to get you to do is, one, think, but two, is there a middle? Is there a middle ground maybe? Can you agree with something Che Guevara, you know, people being executed because they're not willingly going into slavery to make another corporation wealthy? Could you possibly understand Che Guevara's view and understand Ayn Rand's view? That's my challenge to you. And we'll get more towards Ayn Rand's stuff when we get in the 20th century. The 20th century is going to validate a lot of the things she says. All right, this is a big topic, a lot going on here. I'll see you next time.